Today, we speak with Nate Fernhoff, co-founder and CEO of Orca Bio, a biotechnology company developing high-precision cell therapies to treat patients with blood cancers and immune diseases. By applying single-cell technology at scale, Orca Bio aims to deliver transplants that rebuild a patient's blood and immune system while lowering the risk of serious complications. Nate co-founded the company after his research at Stanford, where he helped translate decades of immunology into a platform ready for clinical use. Under his leadership, Orca Bio has advanced its lead program, Orca-T, which recently produced positive phase 3 results, marking a critical milestone on the path to FDA review. I am RJ Lumba, the host of the Healthcare Technology Report podcast. I am the managing partner of GrowthCap and executive chairman of Market Insight Media. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click to follow. Nate, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's a delight to be with you.
Thanks, RJ. Very nice to meet you.
I thought a good place to start is the very beginning on how Orca Bio was formed. I believe you had met your co-founders fairly early on, maybe even in academia.
Yeah, that's right. So, look, the origin story for Orca traces its roots back probably the 1980s, where immunologists were just starting to figure out how to use a new technology called flow cytometry to study immune cells. And so a famous immunologist at Stanford named Weissman figured out that a rare population of cells in the bone marrow were actually stem cells. And these stem cells had a really special property that they could grow back the entire blood system of a mouse from even a single cell. And the only way to identify these cells and sort of pluck them out from the greater complexity of a blood or bone marrow sample was using this novel technology. And that really set the basis for the field of immunology moving forward to purify a cell by virtue of its cell surface markers and its cellular identity, but to purify a cell, to study it in the lab, to really understand what its effect was. You can fast forward 15 years from that discovery and move to just a building across the way at Stanford, where another famous physician scientist was working with regulatory T cells. This was Rob Negrin. And he and his team figured out how you can use purified formulations of regulatory T cells to prevent graft versus host disease. So maybe if I could just take a step back to talk about the problem statement. So if you are a patient today with AML or MDS or ALL, so different types of blood cancers, your best chance for a cure is going to be an allogeneic stem cell transplant, meaning they're going to go get the bone marrow from a donor, and they're going to give that to you to clear out and replace your diseased blood and immune system with that of a healthy donor. And it's sort of magical that this works. And in fact, this was a technology that got started in the 1950s and was really pioneered for the last 70 years to get to where it is today. So that's the benefit of stem cell transplant, is that you can replace the diseased blood immune system with a healthy one. The challenge is that this often produces a lot of complications. It is an intense process that creates a lot of safety risks. So you have things like graft versus host disease, when the incoming cells attack the normal healthy tissue of the patient. You have things like infection that are associated with this immune reset. You have organ damage. And so there's a lot of different complications that accompany a normal conventional stem cell transplant. And so I'll tie it back to those days at Stanford in sort of the early 2000s. Rob Negrin figures out how he can use regulatory T cells to prevent graft versus host disease, one of these major complications in mice. This is really a major discovery. It gets reproduced in labs worldwide in mice, but the efforts to translate that to patients, to translate the benefit to patients, are complicated. Primarily because a mouse-sized sample is small, about 100 million cells. A human-sized sample is big, about 100 billion cells. It's 1,000 times bigger. And so the things that you can do in a lab for a mouse, you cannot do for a patient. And so the efforts to translate that discovery to patients has been full of fits and starts. There have been some truly heroic pioneering efforts from transplant physicians in academia to run small-scale clinical trials. But the story of Orca really picks up where we say, look, we're going to be a company that can manufacture this drug. We're going to create a platform technology that can essentially translate the last 20 years of immunology in this space to not just a couple of patients in a small academic clinical trial, but we're going to be able to translate this to all the patients who today need a stem cell transplant. That was the vision. And the interesting thing is that we have marched steadily along in that vision since the company inception. And I think it's a testament to the strength of the science that came, before the company was ever even incorporated, right? These are ideas that have been out there and tested and retested in mice and in small scale clinical trials. And the company really benefits from that work that was done before us.
It seems somewhat daunting to think that you could undertake this mission to design this platform and kind of do this at scale. What gave you the confidence to know that you could do this? Did you assess the probabilities and say like, yeah, well, I think we have like a 51% chance. Let's go for it.
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think there's a certain Silicon Valley brashness that we're sort of inundated with around here in sort of the startup culture and trying to go after problems that are hard problems and to look for interesting technologies to address them. I think that was really the driving force here, was this idea that we could build these manufacturing platforms and that this was a problem that needed fresh eyes. And so what we've assembled here at Orca is an incredibly talented team of not just scientists who work in the lab, not just immunologists, but also engineers who help us build a lot of this custom production equipment.
Mm-hmm. And where does the company stand today? I mean, every company, particularly in the biotech and life sciences space, has a different kind of arc to it, a different journey. How would you describe the phase you're in currently?
It's a good question. So we have recently announced the completion of our pivotal phase 3 study. So we put out the top line data. Data looks very good. We've done a good job of promoting what we call chronic graft versus host disease free survival as the primary endpoint of the study. And we are working closely with regulators to go from a clinical trial into a commercial drug. And so the company really sort of stands on the precipice of that interaction with FDA and working with them in that final leg of the journey of drug development.
Curious what the vision is. I'm not as in tune with biotech and life sciences as a space as we cover other areas of healthcare technology. Is your vision of the company to be a continuous innovator in the space? Is it to eventually get acquired by one of the big pharma companies? How do you foresee the next 5 to 10 years unfolding?
So we would like Orca to make the most impact for patients. Stem cell transplant today is offered to about 7,000 roughly patients who have AML, MDS, ALL, but there are about 50,000 patients in the US alone who get diagnosed with one of those diseases. And so even within that initial set of indications, it's a very tantalizing question to ask. It seems like a very plausible question. Say, how many of those other patients could we bring in to Orca-T, given that we have a what appears to be a safer profile than a stem cell transplant? So we have a lot of work we need to do in clinical development to ask this question. But the impact of what Orca-T and what our pipeline product Orca-Q might have for these types of patients could be enormous. Now, if you want to draw another further circle around blood cancer, stem cell transplant physicians have used allostem cell transplant on a huge number of indications, because this idea that you're going to replace a diseased blood and immune system with that from a healthy donor doesn't just apply to blood cancer. Right? You could apply that same idea into autoimmune disease or other types of immune tolerance, where you could be impacting tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of Americans a year. And the problem with stem cell transplant has never been efficacy when it's been explored for these other indications. The problem's always been safety.
Mm.
And so, how do we as a company further characterize the safety of our drug? How do we continue to innovate and make this drug safer and safer so that it can be used to address the diseases for these other patients? That's really the big push that we need to make on the development side, in addition to setting up commercial operations.
Mm. Now, I'd like to turn the conversation over to you a little bit more about your background. Did you think early on, say when you were growing up, that you'd want to be an entrepreneur, or were you more driven by the sciences? Did you have an early affinity for biology and chemistry?
I think it's more of the latter. I think I consider myself more of a scientist at the end of the day. And I think what's been a really unique opportunity that, look, in my sort of early scientific days, I was studying problems that were more tangentially related to human health disease, right? I was looking as an enzymologist and a biochemist and really understanding how a single protein works for the sake of generating principles of how do proteins work, right? And just increasing my knowledge and the field's knowledge. And starting to work in immunology was a really big shift for me personally. I think immunology it really goes hand in hand with understanding human diseases and really gives you an interesting set of tools that are unique to address those diseases. And so following my personal journey from very basic science through, okay, science directed to the human condition and disease, and now through to Orca, where we're developing pharmaceuticals that or drugs that will actually be able to address those diseases, I think has been a very rewarding path to sort of direct that energy into something that has benefit for patients. We just had actually come to the company last week a couple of patients who were treated on the clinical trial and they've done quite well. And it was very rewarding for me and for the rest of the company to have those folks come and share their story. It was very emotional. And it's a different type of reward than, working in the lab and publishing a paper and discovering something new. It's a very much more tangible type of work.
Hmm. You've raised some capital, a considerable amount of capital. You've got great investors. Tell us about kind of your process for selecting investors. They're a big part of the company. There's a partnership there. There's some mind share. So we'll love to hear about how you went about that capital selection process.
Yeah, I think finding investors who are value add on top of capital is really important.
Mm.
And we've been very privileged to find folks who are aligned with this mission to grow the impact of Orca-T and Orca-Q to address these patients who don't really have any other options today.
Hmm.
And so the value of finding folks who are strategically aligned with yourself is every company as you're developing, you're going to have a lot of strategic decisions along the way. It's great to be able to walk together through those decisions and to, of course, get feedback and guidance to make sure that you're going to that overall bigger goal. I think that there's also a lot of benefits to folks who have worked in this space. They can make introductions as well to talent. They often can find people who have very relevant experience, lessons learned from both successes and failures in the past. And so our investors have been really wonderful at making a lot of those introductions to folks who want to be employees or advisors at the company.
Last two questions. One is, can you tell us about a person who's had a profound influence on you?
I think I'll come back to this story of Rob Negrin at Stanford. And some of the co-founders were working with Irv Weissman at the time and being a part of this story and kind of connecting in at Stanford. There was another transplant physician, Everett Meyer, who we continue to work with. And I think being able to see that vision as a basic scientist, right? As a researcher, you're in the lab, you're working with mice, you're working with cells in the hood. And to have that connection to the physicians who are treating patients and can really help define that unmet need and work to say, no, look, don't worry about these things. Patients need this today. Worry about these things, right? And to have those conversations along the way at company inception has just been really critical to charting the path. And like I said, I think we've been largely developing the same story. It's been the same narrative essentially since the inception of the company.
My last question is typically, can you tell us about a charity cause or other endeavor that you're passionate about? But it feels like your cause and endeavor is inherent in your own company. So you could choose to answer that question, or you could just tell us how you like to spend your time outside of work and family.
Well, that time gets drilled to zero. It is work and it is family. That is basically, I'm sort of boring outside of those things. There's not a lot of time for anything else at home. We have a 5-year-old, we have 2 poodles. That's enough outside of work. And I'm very satisfied with that balance.
Excellent. So mission driven, really focused on Orca and the family. Nate, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been a true pleasure.
Thanks, RJ. Really nice to connect.